And good morning as we continue with this commemoration. I think perhaps hear ye, hear ye, hear ye. The session is now in place. In July 1776, John Page served as the president of the Virginia Council of State and as the acting lieutenant governor of Virginia. On the 20th of July, there are two letters that ground what we're doing here today. One of them was to, let me pull this out, was to John Hancock. And he writes this in his official capacity as the lieutenant governor of Virginia, noting, and this text is original from the Library of Virginia, so forgive me if I stumble over one of these words. But he notes in this letter that he has received the Declaration of Independence and intends immediately to publish it so that the people may be universally informed of it, who, we have the pleasure to inform you, have been impatiently expecting it and will receive it with great joy. He also writes a letter to Thomas Jefferson. He begins that letter with, "My dear Jefferson." And that letter talks about arms and cannons and other things that are not germane to this. However, his P.S. says, "I am highly pleased with your declaration. God preserve the United States. We know the race is not to the swift nor the battle to the strong. Do you not think an angel rides in the whirlwind and directs this storm?" We don't know exactly how John Page honored his commitment to distribute and to publish this Declaration of Independence. We do know that John Page was a member of Abingdon, was a faithful member of this church, served as one of the first deputies to the General Convention, which established the Episcopal Church. And so it is very prudent and likely to conclude that he would have, as a patriot and as a member of this church, stood in this space and shared the news of the Declaration with people of Gloucester. He would have shared in other places as well. But to honor his commitment to publish this declaration, members of our community today share it with you.
The unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and the natures God entitled them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its power in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. And accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed.
But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably The same object advances to a design to reduce them under absolute despotism. It is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history, repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states.
To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. He has refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance, unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be obtained, and when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend to them. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only.
He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records, for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasions on the rights of the people. He has refused for a long time, after such dissolutions, to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers, incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsions within.
He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states, for that purpose, obstructing the laws of naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriation of lands. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. He has made judges dependent on his will alone for their tenure, for their offices, and for the amount and payment of their salaries.
He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. He has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. He has affected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation, for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, for protecting them by a mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states.
For cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent, for depriving us, in many cases, of the benefits of trial by jury, for the transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses, for abolishing the free system of English law in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government, and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for inducing the same absolute rule into these colonies.
For taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our governments, for suspending our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny, already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages, and totally unworthy the head of a civilized nation.
He has constrained our fellow citizens, taken captive on the high seas, to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. He has excited domestic insurrections among us, and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers, the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions.
In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. Nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to attend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our emigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and consanguinity. We must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation and hold them, as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war, in peace, friends.
We, Therefore, the representatives of the United States of America in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the vicissitude of our intentions, do, in the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all alliance to the British Crown, and that all political connections between them and the state of Great Britain ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of the divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our honor, our sacred honor.
The signatories from the Virginia deputation: George Wythe, Richard Henry Lee, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Harrison, Thomas Nelson Jr., Francis Lightfoot Lee, Carter Braxton, and 47 other signatories from the 12 other colonies: Pennsylvania, Robert Morris, Benjamin Rush, Benjamin Franklin, John Morton, George Clymer, James Smith, George Taylor, James Wilson, George Ross. And Delaware, Caesar Rodney, George Reed, Thomas McKean. From New York, William Floyd, Philip Livingston, Francis Lewis, Lewis Morris. From New Jersey, Richard Stockton, John Witherspoon, Francis Hopkinson, John Hart, Abraham Clark. Of New Hampshire, Josiah Bartlett, William Whipple. Of Massachusetts, John Hancock, Samuel Adams, John Adams, Robert Treat Paine, Elbridge Gerry. Rhode Island, Stephen Hopkins and William Ellery. From Connecticut, Roger Sherman, Samuel Worthington, William Williams, Oliver Walcott. From New Hampshire, Matthew Thornton. Of Georgia, Button Gwinnett, Lyman Hall, George Walton. Of North Carolina, William Hooper, Joseph Hughes, John Penn. Of South Carolina, Edmund Rutledge, Thomas Haywood Jr., Thomas Lynch Jr., Arthur Middleton. And from Maryland, Samuel Chase, William Paca, Thomas Stone, and Charles Carroll of Carrollton.
We have come together to honor John Page's commitment to publish this declaration. The declaration reached the people in many ways, and in the parish house in just a few moments, Sarah Mischut of the Museum of the American Revolution has a presentation on how the declaration reached the American people. There's also a reception by the DAR chapter, and the room where Sarah will be talking has tables. So if you'd like to grab a nibble and then go to the talk, that is fine, but the talk will begin in a short time from now. Thank you to all the readers, and thank you for participating in this event. Again, good morning, and it's so good to see all of you here for this special event in the life of our church and the life of our country. I just want to thank all those who read the Declaration just a short while ago. They practiced yesterday and came together, I think, quite nicely. And the fact that we have Sarah, who is one of the senior curators at the Museum of the American Revolution in Yorktown, with us. And when I was talking about this concept, she said, well, what you need to do is, and then she laid out the program. I said, and she said, do you have any idea who would speak? I said, yes, I do have an idea who would speak. And so I'm very glad that Sarah, who was a member of Abingdon, but also has her historical museum and curator hat on today, is going to enlighten us on how this very important document reached the people from Philadelphia into all the colonies, and the methods and people that took place to make it possible so that we may enjoy the benefits of liberty. Sarah, oh, and I should say, thank you to the Augustine Warner chapter of the DAR. Always gracious with their hospitality. And Allison, I'm talking to you and all your fellow members. Thank you very much for all you do. If you're in the great hall and can't hear, there are a few chairs in here yet open, and so feel free to move in. And if you can hear, then continue listening. But please refrain conversation so that we don't have more ambient noise disturbance. Sarah.
Thank you. Well, thank you, fellow Abingdon congregants, and thank you, Daughters of the American Revolution, for allowing me to speak. And in particular, I thank the Lady Regent Alison Johnston for the very generous bounty they have offered today. So I am going to talk about how these wonderful words, we hold these truths to be self-evident. Who were the first people to hear Thomas Jefferson's wonderful words spoken in public? Because the theme I'm going to follow is that the whole document is addressed to the American people. The purpose of this declaration was to lay out the intent and the purpose for breaking with the sovereignty of Great Britain. And it lays out the justification in a very thorough way. After all, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, they were lawyers. So they laid out something like 37 counts against King George III and his ministry. But who were the first people to hear these words and this declaration? A declaration that was in fact a promise to the American people that if they supported the common cause and unified all those 13 colonies, the representatives of all those 13 colonies, if they unified and supported the cause, then independence could be won. And everyone knew that they would have to fight, or good fight. So this was a very important message. It would involve almost everyone, patriot, farmer, clerk, tradesman, child, woman, everyone. So I wanted to suggest that we might look at who first heard these words. Well, actually, recent research published in 1992 in the Pennsylvania Magazine discovered who that might be. July the 4th, as you know, Congress approved the Committee of Five's draft of the Declaration of Independence. And the person who actually wrote that, Thomas Jefferson, the first draft, that copy has never survived. It was manuscript. But it did reach John Dunlap, the printer, who Congress appointed to produce printed copies. So the people who first heard those words were in Philadelphia at the State House. And somebody came out on the steps of the State House on July the 4th and read the Declaration just as we've heard. Who was that person? Well, recent research has discovered it was either Charles Thomson, the Secretary of Congress, or a man you may never have heard of, Colonel Timothy Matlack. He was colonel of the 5th Pennsylvania Militia Regiment. He was also Charles Thomson's scribe or clerk, and he had a beautiful hand. And we know his hand because the finished copy that was completed, according to the will of Congress, is manuscript on parchment. And that was Timothy Matlack's handwriting. How do we know this? Well, because the original Declaration traveled with Congress. It's rather like regalia for a sovereign. It gave authority to the meeting. Now that's an important point. Because it was endorsed by the people's representatives of all of the 13 colonies, it represented the American people's will. So it traveled with Congress wherever Congress went. Baltimore, Pennsylvania, you name it. During the war, Congress traveled, and this document traveled with. So the important thing today is to bear in mind that Congress was very, very diligent, and John Dunlap, the printer appointed by Congress, printed 200 broadsides that were reproductions of the manuscript in print. This is the copy most Americans saw in their lifetime as a broadside, a single sheet that was posted in a public place, courthouse, States House, public assembly, tavern, you name it. That was printed to share in all the colonies, and I'll get to how that happened in a minute. The other method was through a newspaper. Remember how important the press is and freedom of the press in the US Constitution. So newspaper people up and down the eastern seaboard printed a copy of the Dunlap for their paper. It was either a single sheet inset or it was part of the newspaper, integral with the newspaper. So what I'm trying to tell you is that print culture brought it to the majority of the American people who were going to fight for independence. So on the 8th of July, a public reading was required, and that happened in Philadelphia, of course. And on the July the 9th, important date, New York was the last of the representatives to endorse the Declaration, July the 9th. So they changed the title of the Declaration when it was, disseminated to the United States, colonies. And that is an important point, that representation of all the colonies was there. Why? Because unity was the way to succeed. United, we stand. Division makes us weak. So that was one of the purposes of the Declaration, is to unite everyone under a common purpose. It's also a promise that a new form of government would be established. That government would be res publica. It is government for the people, by people's representatives. Very important point. So that's where the republic idea comes forward. And then there are many Enlightenment ideas enshrined in the Declaration, which I won't go into because they're philosophical. They're produced by people like John Locke and the Frenchman Montesquieu. But you can read about that afterwards. So on July the 9th, George Washington in New York read the Declaration of Independence to the entire American Army, the Continental Army. How do we know that Colonel Timothy Matlock wrote what we know in the National Archives as the Declaration? Well, in 1841, the Declaration of Independence stopped traveling around with Congress. It was getting worn out. And so it was exhibited in a great frame along with George Washington's commission. And in 1992, a handwriting expert, looking at the two documents within the same frame, said they're by the same man, Timothy Matlock. So I thought I'd bring something new to this presentation. But after John Dunlap printed the first broadside, you know, when we say broadcast, what we're talking about is reaching people. A broadside, broadcast. So how did it go further than the 200 copies went? By rider, by post, by dispatch officer. Well, it also travelled by ship. It went to France in August and later on to other places. It was not sent to England. But at this very time, our National Archives at Kew have a wonderful exhibit on the Declaration of Independence. And they have a newspaper printing of the Declaration of Independence that was printed in New Hampshire. And it's an inset, so it's a broad set into a newspaper. And it is perfectly preserved. It was discovered in the 20th century by a scholar who was at Kew, and the National Archives, curious to know what was in a file called intercepted documents. Intercepted. Declaration of Independence, captured by a British war sloop, obviously a privateer in New Hampshire waters, I think, and it came back to Britain and was intercepted. So another thought for the day is, I don't think King George ever saw the Declaration of Independence. So the second, as it were, dissemination happens through newspapers, through broadsides produced in the 30 colonies. Then later on, when Congress had been booted out of Philadelphia by the British, they arrived in Baltimore, and this is August 1776. And they needed to circulate to each state assembly in all the United Colonies, now states, an official copy with the names, the 56 names, of the signatories that you heard in church today. So Dunlap was in Philadelphia. Who did they go to? A woman, Catherine Goddard, produced the first engrossed edition printed of the Declaration of Independence. And she was a widow. You know, widows could inherit their husband's business. Usually in America and in England, women could not run a business. Even a tavern. They could if they were a widow. So Catherine Goddard produced the first engrossed edition, but they weren't real signatures. Congress was still gathering all the signatures, and Charles Carroll of Carrollton was one of the last to inscribe his name on the fair copy on parchment that was manuscript. So, when John Quincy Adams is Secretary of State, and he's a very intelligent, very well-educated man, he has a preservationist take on the Declaration. He says this poor one-eyed document, we really need to have a facsimile made. So Congress set up a committee and they chose a brilliant engraver called William Stone to produce the authoritative copy of the engrossed parchment. And it was to be engraved on parchment. So that's 1823 to 4. It took him 2 years to do that, to absolutely replicate the signatures, because they're all very different. You know, John Hancock's is one of the biggest. But he managed it, and then about 4,000 copies were made using the process of engraving. And that is a true facsimile, and they're very expensive. You can go to Colonial Williamsburg and see one on exhibit today. So we have that facsimile as well, but we're not as wealthy as Colonial Williamsburg. So when yours truly wanted to contribute to the Give Me Liberty exhibition, which is a wonderful exhibition at our museum, I was looking around in 2023 and I found another William Stone that was not the first edition of 1824, but one that was taken from the same plate as William Stone's, and permission was granted to Peter Force, a archivist, a collector of American foundational documents, which he left to the Library of Congress. So Peter Force's great collection of American documents he gave to the Library of Congress. So he commissioned this with the permission of Congress, of course, who held the plate. And he was going to publish that in an enormous volume called American Archives. And so a huge number, like 4,000, were pulled for his book, which he never finished. So we have one of the Peter Force edition of the William Stone, authoritative facsimile. And you can see it in our exhibition, Give Me Liberty. And I have a whole host of handouts, and I'm going to hand those out to you. I'm almost done with this reading. So if you want to have a copy of the Declaration of Independence that we have, on the back of it is a flyer for our exhibition. And you're most welcome to come and enjoy the exhibition, which is about the Declaration and its promise. So thank you very much.
Sarah, for those who are interested, how long does that exhibition run? Like, should they all leave here now and go forthwith? Or do they have a day or so to get
January 2027, the end of January 2027.
So before the end of January 2027, make plans on going to that individually. I'll talk to Joanne and maybe we'll arrange a field trip for those who want to go as a group, but don't let that hold you back if you want to go. So again, Sarah, thank you for bringing the goodies you're about to hand out, as well as just a depth of knowledge of how this wonderful document, this declaration, came to be with us. So again, thank you all for being here. There's no Q&A period, but talk among yourselves, eat some things, and be sure to thank a DAR member for their gracious hospitality.
Thank you.